Hello everybody, thank you all so much for joining us here today for this panel conversation. We are going to have what I hope is a really important and crucially kind of proactive conversation around how we can continue making progress in accessibility in spite of the ever-growing backlash and resistance that we're seeing globally to diversity, equity and inclusion. And I think just pausing on that for a minute, it's important to acknowledge that this backlash is very real, that we are seeing. In the United States, companies are dismantling their diversity, equity, inclusion policies. The Super Bowl, for example, has recently moved away from anti-racism commitments. My former employer, KPMG, in the United States, has scrapped DE&I reporting. And whilst I'd rather not mention his name on this panel, Donald Trump has specifically targeted the disabled community on multiple occasions. Unfortunately, we're also seeing these issues intensify here in the United Kingdom. Just over the last week or two, we've seen our government and media using fear and blame to push an agenda of reforming and changing the welfare system in the UK. As I said, we're here to, whilst acknowledge the many challenges that there are, think about practical steps and things we can do to continue moving that conversation forward in accessibility. I'm really fortunate today to be joined by a panel that needs very, very little introduction. Samantha, Renke, actress, TV personality, influencer. We've got Dom Hyams, global leader at Purple Goat. We've got Hafsa, Ameen, inclusive mobility and technology strategist, and Victoria Jenkins, CEO and founder of Unhidden. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. I think starting with Dom, if that's okay.
Well practiced.
Practice, yeah, very sweet. What does inclusion mean to you personally? What does it truly mean to be inclusive?
I think for me, both personally and professionally, it's about the removal of barriers to create genuine opportunity and parity for everyone. We want to create a world where anyone has the opportunity to deliver on their ambitions and their imagination. And if we have these fundamental roadblocks, shall we say, and a divide that's getting created, those things that exist and that we see around us only become that bit more challenging. So for me, we really, really need to be creating a world, to what inclusion is we need to be creating a more harmonious, more of a community-driven world around us. And what we're seeing in the world right now, and I know we'll come on to it, and as you said, is one that is threatening the very fabric of what we are trying to do day in, day out in our daily lives. Everyone in this probably whole NEC, So it's a big topic, and I'm just really glad that you guys chose to talk about this on this platform today because it feels really important and really big.
Thank you. I mean, so much there, division, blocks, harmony. I think we'll come back to that a lot through this conversation. I would like to pass to Sam, if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, I all have different takes on it, but I think personally for me, as someone who, rejected my disability identity for many, many years, I lived most of my teenage years, childhood, and some of my 20s, not wanting to even socialise with any other disabled person. That changed when I became a trustee for the Brittle Bone Society, and all of a sudden I understood that my community, and I appreciate that all of us like to use the term disability community, but I felt a community spirit just by being here today or getting to know all the disabled people. Inclusion for me is always being mindful that I am the voice not only for my own rights and autonomy, but I'm also mindful that I represent other people in my community, and I'm very vocal on that. I worked in television, and over the years I've really challenged broadcasters who have very much leaned into the token disabled person in a wheelchair who still looks very palatable, if I can say that, to the enabled gaze. And I've always said, well, I've got friends with feeding tubes. I've got friends who are non-verbal. I've got friends who have got facial differences. Where are they? And I was always met with, well, we've got a girl in a wheelchair and we can get you on TV every now and then. So for me, when I enter a space and the word inclusion is brought up, I'm always very mindful to champion and to be a cheerleader from people who aren't at the same privilege as me, in that space. So I think, equity, and that's another one of those buzzwords, but equity and understanding that we all have a responsibility, whether we like it or not, as disabled, deaf disabled, and neurodivergent people, to, champion other people in our community.
Thank you. Victoria, I saw you nodding quite a lot during that, so I've got to come to you next, if that's okay.
I think for me, it changes, I think, what inclusion means to me, but in my work in fashion, it's actually not just about the front of the camera, although representation is obviously massive. Nothing's going to change unless we're in the rooms. So I think it starts with school, it starts with our ability to go to university, and I know damn well if I'd have had disabled on my CV, I wouldn't have been hired at a single company that I worked at. So I just used to stay chronically ill and kind of got away with it. But I think that's the issue, is we all need to be in these rooms. And I think the reason it's taken so long for the fashion industry and broadcasters every industry to get behind us is because we have to get into these rooms, and they just don't think about us as we're not seen. They don't include us. But I think something I really do want to mention, pardon, it's not necessarily my place, but there is a huge issue with racism and disability advocacy. I know Sam's touched on it, and I'm starting to find it really quite uncomfortable. So I think I'm really actually going to ask everyone here to please put every ethnicity into diversity as well, because I think that is, we've kind of got to a point where, yes, quite the sake of people are seeing more. It's not good enough, and we know the health outcomes are worse, the opportunities are worse. So I think inclusion's still got a really long way to go, and I've considered.
Certainly does, and yeah, I think that point on intersectionality we will come back to in a little bit because it's so important. Hafsa.
Thank you. A couple of words have been mentioned by the panel already that ring really true when I think about inclusion, and one of them is equitable opportunity. There's another word that I think for me means inclusion, and that means feeling safe and feeling valued in every environment. If I'm going into a workplace, if I'm going into a business, if I'm going into a public space, if I'm going into a community, I want to be able to be myself, give my individual, unique perspective without the fear of being judged or physically, mentally or emotionally harmed. Unfortunately, when it comes to inclusion, and specifically, my background is in transport and tech, so I'm going to talk about transport and infrastructure a little bit. The bar is very low when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to inclusion. We're talking about ramps, we're talking about rails, and that's the conversation. However, true inclusion and the real opportunity and the challenge of inclusion is actually making sure that we are all able to participate fully in every single way.
Thank you. I think that leads on to a question I'd like to ask you, Victoria, if that's okay. Where does the business case come into accessibility? And I think picking up on a word that's been mentioned a couple of times, how do we move beyond tokenism?
Well, like recently, from what I do with my work, we know that disabled founders are more likely to hire other disabled people, which is pretty awesome. I think 10 times more often. I saw a stat this morning, and obviously been reading the news, which is pretty depressing. The per pound, we all talk about that a lot, but it's no good having that if we don't actually have the products to buy. So the UK High Street loses £274 million a month by not being accessible and not offering accessible products. So there is a financial incentive if you want to ignore the social. But businesses are more profitable when they have a more diverse board. We're still not seeing in C-suite very many disabled founders or leaders. I think there's a huge way to go. But it's exciting, it's innovative. So rather than seeing it as a barrier to break down, I think we need to get people excited about what it means to do it, because even take a pair of trousers, we're not reinventing the wheel, but making it so that a pair of trousers can be worn by more people is way more interesting than just making a bit of walkable art that goes down the runway. So I think there's huge scope, and we see everything here, everybody here is so passionate about this. And we all know it's going to touch somebody at some point in their lives. 73% of consumers know someone with a disability. I think NADEX is incredible, but wouldn't it be wonderful if this was full of non-disabled people hearing all of this? Because much as I feel like this is so wonderful to see so many people here, and I always feel safer in a space like this. We all know, we don't need to keep preaching to the choir, I think is the problem with a lot of our work is we all know this. It's just we need people that don't know this to see it, because I think unless they hear it and see these real life stories, they're just not going to get on.
Yeah. I suppose the risk of the echo chamber that can come from that, which I think leads on to Dom, and I suppose the work you've done with brands, and when the brands get this right and what works well.
Yeah, I think for us, it's exactly that point. We all too often have seen ourselves have this conversation with ourselves, which is lovely, but we actually obviously want to create tangible impact for everyone. And at Purple Dough, as an inclusive marketing agency, we are hand-holding brands through creating more inclusive, representative work day in, day out. But to do that, we don't just want to sit on the hearts and minds conversation of, inclusion, because hopefully, in 2025, people that we're talking to kind of get that, we hope. I mean, it may be wrong, but we hope they do. So therefore, we've taken a conversation more around this growth opportunity, more around have you actually stopped to think about this largest minority in the world as potential consumers and how you can actually engage them as consumers, because that surely is a really powerful place for you as a brand to play. And that doesn't just benefit disabled people. They are incredibly responsive and receptive to inclusive content, but that also impacts non-disabled audiences and customers. We see the more diverse advertising creates better brand recall, better positive sentiment in the general population, not just in the disabled community. So there is an incredibly real, tangible business case to creating inclusive, accessible work. And that is something, maybe unfortunately, that we do tap into, and it's not just a no-brainer, but ultimately, businesses are businesses and they have to justify their investments and things. So we have those kind of dual track approach, I suppose. One around this growth opportunity that's very real, they should kind of look at. And then obviously one is this is going to create the best product, and that's also part of it. The more inclusive, better the actual end result is going to be as well.
It's kind of mutually reinforcing. I think that point on visibility and representation is one that's been coming up a lot through this conversation. Sam, how does language and visibility shape public attitudes towards accessibility?
Gosh, we could talk about language quite a lot, but can I just say before I get into it, I think what is missing with a lot of these initiatives is we're kind of we're not looking at the foundations, we're not addressing the real systemic issues, we're covering them up. Even though some of these initiatives are amazing, what Victoria's doing is amazing, but we're not getting to the root of the challenges and the fact that we live in such a disabling world. And a lot of that is because disabled people are so indoctrinated, and I've made this term up myself, it's the gratitude narrative, but we've got a ramp. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, yes, oh my god, thank you so much. You've got a ramp, you've included us. But what that actually does is ignore the fact that a ramp is not sufficient. We want better job opportunities. We want to be, at the table when people are having these decisive conversations. Leading on to the question that we've just been talking about, having more disabled role models, kind of having that advocacy for ourselves is the only way that we're actually going to address the holistic, underbelly of the fractured infrastructure. Empowering yourself to be like, that's great that you've got a ramp, however, my needs also need X, Y, and Z. Sorry, I just needed to... With regards to language, I think it's one of the most diversive and terrifying things that I ever have to talk to pre-disabled peers, because as we all know, a lot of non-disabled or pre-disabled people, don't want to say the wrong thing, and I often challenge them and go, well actually, what you're doing by not engaging with disabled people and asking a really simple question, what language would you like to use to describe yourself, you're further, marginalising an already huge, underrepresented, underserved minority. Not for decades and decades and generations have been dictated to about language and how best to describe ourselves. And now that we have a little bit more autonomy, now that we have a platform, now that we have amazing opportunities, yes, they're few and far between, but we are getting more opportunities, we are allowed to go, hang on a minute, I'm not too sure on that terminology or that language, but bear with me, because we're having these conversations. And I think it's important that we are allowed to confront ableist language without other people's egos getting in the way. And I think it's really important to our non-disabled peers to not stop that from engaging fully with disabled people.
Thank you. I'm keen to continue the conversation as well around opportunities to push back against the narrative and to drive change here and keep driving progress. So I think we'll be starting with you, Hafsa, if that's okay. We're seeing technology, AI transform the world around us. Where do you see some of the biggest bright spots and opportunities to apply that to improving accessibility?
Yeah, another hot topic. In the sense that there's a lot of rapid development that's going on at the moment. I think it has a lot of promise, and I'll get to the part where I think the promise hasn't quite delivered yet, but the promise is there. So starting again with transport, autonomous cars, driverless cars, I think we can all imagine having driverless cars could make transport so much easier for so many people. Here we're talking about disabled people, right? We're talking about people in wheelchairs, we're talking about visual impairments, but actually one of the points that was mentioned earlier, that when we're designing products with accessibility in mind, we're actually designing for a much larger population. So I'm also thinking about, parents with prams, I'm also thinking about tourists with suitcases, and it would be an incredible thing to have in our cities. It's not too far away. In the US and in China, they do have certain use cases where driverless cars work. I think there's a lot more work to be done to make sure that they're safe to be in our cities. Beyond transport, I think there's a lot going on in terms of AI-powered smart wheelchairs. So again, obstacle detection and learning from the environment and from the user preferences to make sure that the users are staying safe and secure. Moving a little bit beyond that, I think there's, again, a lot of cool stuff happening in communication, training and education. And that's where, you've got speech to text. My hope is that we will have devices that can, automatically understand the needs of a user and change the interface. If someone needs speech rather than text, it does that automatically. We're seeing, again, with different cognitive disabilities, there's a lot of work that's being done in the education space when it comes to digital platforms. However, I said that the promise hasn't been delivered, so we're seeing a lot of problems with these AI tools, especially when it comes to inclusivity. So I'm only going to touch on one, which is the bias in our data sets. So I'll give you an example from the recruitment industry. So I'm sure everyone here can appreciate that when it comes to recruitment, there's certain biases that have existed in this country, and whichever country you go to, the biases may look different, but they're biases. Against women, against disabled people, against people from different ethnic minorities, against people who speak in a different accent. I know, there's a whole thing about northern accent versus a southern accent. That bias has existed, and unfortunately, that bias continues to persist when it comes to AI. Recruitment industry has really taken to using AI tools to do screening, and we can see that they are unfairly screening out individuals who have a different accent, who have speech impairments. So it's not perfect. The solution is there. We just need to make sure we're using the right data, we're auditing the data needs to be diverse. So now the conversation is moving beyond, physically we're here and it's a diverse group of people. We just need to make sure that the data that AI is being used to train on is also diverse.
Thank you. It's brought up a theme again around intersectionality and collaboration across different communities. So keen to ask the question, how do we build stronger allyship across different communities? Does anyone want to go first on that?
Well, I think it's collaboration. I think, unfortunately, we're still in a space where, and I've seen it when people start to argue online, when we as disabled people start to have quite vicious spats with each other online, non-disabled people see that and not getting involved. So I think there is a level of still we have to have a bit of, we can be firm, we can be fair. I think sometimes there has been a bit of an incident sometimes with, it doesn't have to be public, you can have that spat privately, you don't have to do it out where everyone can see, because we're not thinking about who else is watching. And I think, when you think about data and tech, even when you look on LinkedIn, all the people, I talk about disability, I don't know what opportunities I'm not getting because I am very open about my conditions and how they impact me. It's, even when I was fundraising, which was an awful long time, I think I was having an easier time now. I think disabled families are having, don't get me wrong, I've done it all, I've gone in wage arrangements, meetings and pitches and all sorts, but I have found that doesn't help. When people feel attacked, they don't want to help. So I think we've still got to sort of do that, not softly approach, kindly, just work together. I think collaborative teamwork is where the dream work happens, really. No one does anything in space entirely on their own. We always have other people with us. I think it's just being open to that and just being open to opportunities and see, because you never know what might happen and where things might change.
Thank you. Teamwork, dream work. I think if there's one quote that we take away, really appreciate that.
Touched upon it a little bit in my first answer, and I think unity amongst our own community. So I did a post not that long ago about, should our allies offer help to us? So if they see us out and about, should they go, hey, can I help you? And as someone who relies on the kindness of strangers to maintain my independence, I love that. I love that interaction. I would be carried around on a pillow if it would come to that, literally. So I love the fact that I can go, yes, you can help me. And if you want, you can carry that, and you can grab me that, and you can get me that. And when I actually did this post, one another. I'm going to call it pushback, and that's being kind. I got a lot of pushback from other disabled people who are like, hell no, I do not want any help from anyone. I find that patronising conversation a little bit more. And I was like, okay, so explain to me why you don't like that help, or why you feel threatened by that help, and so on. And we had this really meaningful conversation. And although I really don't want to invalidate anyone's experience of being disabled, my point really urge you to understand that if you tell someone to do one, right, not how dare you offer help to me, you may be hindering other people in your community who heavily rely on that support. So again, just be mindful. I think allyship and support starts within our own community, because as Victoria said, we're having these really vicious arguments online. Guys, that is too much of a minefield to step into. So let's have a little bit more empathy, compassion, unity amongst our own community, and then we can strongly all go together and go, right, we may not all agree, but this is the basis of how we as disabled people wish to be treated. Can you support that, or can you not?
Thank you.
Yeah, just picking up on both those great points. Again, putting the kind of purple coat professional hat on, we find that we started out as a social agency trying to create the most representative campaigns, utilising progressive voices in the disabled community. And that is absolutely our bread and butter, and it is an amazing tool to kind of drive community voice and education into the non-disabled community, and beyond. What I also find is that we didn't realise it, but creating that safe space where we are almost presenting, a palatable view of disability, to Victoria's point about we're going in the room talking the same marketing language as any other agency, and that we find, creates that aha, okay, I was really worried it was going to be a disability thing. We know that, we know that there's all this prejudice and preconception and kind of pent up fear around what doing something inclusively, or what doing something accessibly, or what doing something representatively might be. But until you're kind of open to engaging and learning and listening and asking and collaborating with an open dialogue, that is really difficult. For us, to Sam's point, we are all, I'm sure, on this stage, really open books. We've probably realised that it's become beneficial in our lives to just, I often joke about, I've got no dignity, and I say it flippantly, that it's helped me in my life to just not give a shit. And actually, we're probably all quite similar in that, but actually that also is disarming to other people. We've learned that actually creating a very open conversation is one that gets us to where we want to be quicker, and that, I think, for us, social is an amazing place to create that, collaborative conversation, and that's one we tap into sort of day in, day out. Obviously, accessible media helps that too. So, more of the same, but again, more of an open dialogue, as these guys have said.
Thank you, really appreciate that. There is so much more that I'd love to ask all of you and continue exploring these points. I've just been told by our kind of helpful colleagues that we are at time, and I think Dom, I know, Dom, that is a really kind of poignant place to finish, actually. I think when you opened up the conversation with the first response, you were talking about breaking down barriers and the need for harmony, and I think that was the word. And then I think kind of circling back on that, Sam, talking about unity and support and allyship as well. So I think these themes have come through incredibly strongly.